Call on Government Orders of the Day, numbers 5 and 6.
Brokering Weapons and Related Items Controls Bill, Committee Stage. Families Commission Act Repeal Bill, Committee Stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Brokering Weapons and Related Items Controls Bill and the Families Commission Act Repeal Bill. Madam Chair.
The House and Committee on the Brokering Weapons and Related Items Control Bill and the Families Commission Act Repeal Bill. Members, we turn first to the Brokering Weapons and Related Items Control Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part. I call the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise to take a call in respect of Part 1 of the Brokering Weapons and Related Items Control Bill. I made a contribution in respect of the second reading of this, and when I read this legislation, I thought that I'd like to have some clarity as to what the effect of the definition of brokering activity is, which is set out in Section 4 of the Act as meaning, Section 4 it says has the meaning set out in Section 5. Section 5, or Clause 5 of the bill, as it is more properly described now, says in this Act, brokering activity means arranging, facilitating or negotiating a transaction that involves the international transfer of weapons or related items from a place outside New Zealand to another place outside New Zealand. It includes, in relation to a transaction described in paragraph A, acting as an agent for a person involved in the transaction or as an intermediary between two or more persons involved in the transaction, and also includes acquiring or storing weapons in relation, storing items in a place outside of New Zealand for the purpose of transferring those weapons or related items outside of New Zealand, but doesn't include the provision of service that is mere ancillary to that, for example, the provision of administrative assistance, administrative customs broking or financial services. So it seems to me that we're going after more than the person who is the broker. We're going for agents of the broker. But I'm just wondering, as I read this, whether what level of involvement is required on the part of a New Zealander in order for them to be found an agent. Now, one of the reasons why this is important is that this is unusual piece of legislation in that it grants New Zealand courts ability to prosecute New Zealanders for their actions outside of New Zealand. As I've already said, this also includes the facilitating or negotiating of transactions that involve the transfer of weapons outside of New Zealand. And my understanding is that that work can be effectively done by a New Zealander outside of New Zealand, and it will still be brought within the New Zealand Criminal Code because, of course, a breach of this legislation carries with it penalties which are set out in other parts of the Act. But in order for that to happen, you have to be caught as being someone who is involved in a brokering activity. This includes dual-use goods, and there's some complexity around this. So I would be grateful if the Minister could explain before, not immediately, but before the end of this debate, what level of involvement is required for you to be seen to be an agent. I don't see that specific. I know this is legislation that the Minister has inherited from the prior government and that it's been well considered by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, but as I read the legislation, I wasn't clear what in practice would amount to that level of activity that would be caught by the bill. I know that there will have been some actual examples probably given by officials to the Select Committee as to what amounts to a involvement that would be sufficient to to bring this into play. And in the 1 minute and 59:58, in the minute that I have available, I would also look to see whether we could also have some clarity as to what dual-use goods means. I understand that goods can have a civilian use but are intended for military end use, and they fall within a specified category. Could we have some indication as to how we're going to find what is on that specified category? I'm thinking, for example, of global positioning systems. We know that some of the work that, for example, is done with global positioning systems, that work can be used for a farm purpose, or to position, a device relative to an orchard, but it can also be used for military purposes. So we're going to have some way in which we practically define that, so that we don't catch unintendedly things that shouldn't be caught.
I call Simon O'Connor.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Inspired choice, really. Humble, of course, as well. Madam Chair, look, very pleased